Hi, this is Ocean with your Freethinkers Group report for the 10th of October 2020. This is our second interview with Greg from Legalized Freedom. The plan is to cover the items from question 2 of the survey. The first one is extraterrestrials and their involvement in human affairs. Is that okay with you, Greg?
Absolutely, Ocean, and thank you. Yes, we're going to be dealing with this question, as you mentioned, from the survey, which we covered in a more broad way last time, and people can still find the link to the survey. I think that's going to be live for a while, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, through to Christmas.
So maybe you can get us started then, just fill in a bit more detail of your opening point there.
Well, of course, it's absolutely huge subject, extraterrestrials, that have been going on for, actually, you could say thousands of years, but we certainly know about extraterrestrial visitations or abductions or what have you for the last 30, 40 years, I would say, or perhaps even longer. Actually, if you go back to Roswell, it's 1947.
Yes, I think Roswell is regarded as the beginning of modern ufology, isn't it, really? That's kind of the catalyzing event. But there was an incident prior to that, but I think in most people's minds, that's really where the modern era begins.
Yeah. So, but what the particular interest I've got in it, I mean, I'm interested in all the various situations, and it's quite a complex topic, including, of course, crop circles and so on. But the one I wanted to concentrate on was time travel, because I'm particularly interested in time travel.
Yes, well, time travel is something, this is interesting, and we probably differ on this point. I think that our understanding of time is limited, and probably we afford too much importance to it. So therefore, I think the question of time travel, I don't think that space and time are fundamental in reality, if you see what I mean. There's no space time grid on which reality is hanging. I think that space and time are concepts within something bigger, within consciousness. Now, that is subject for a different show, of course, but it might account for if I come at the subject of time a little bit differently than you do. But time travel, there's been so much speculation about it, and of course a lot of popular science fiction hangs on time travel concepts. It's the whole thing that drives the famous science fiction story in Planet of the Apes, and that involves time travel that is scientifically kind of proven. It's well understood, and that's time dilation, which is, of course, if you traveling at sort of closer to the speed of light, then, well, the faster you travel, basically the time slows down, essentially. So when you get past certain speeds, and in Planet of the Apes, the American astronauts, they take off from Earth and they fly, spoiler alert, by the way, if you haven't seen it or read it, and they head off to another planet. They land there. It turns out, in the end, the twist in the plot is that they're actually back on Earth, but it's, even though they've only been journeying through space for a couple of years, Earth time has moved on much quicker, and there are several lifetimes have gone by on Earth. So it's well understood. So perhaps you could say a little bit about, just give us, your perspective on time travel beyond time dilation.
Yeah, that one is kind of like you're moving into the future, but the particular one I'm interested in is the idea that we've got beings from the future coming back to now to correct timelines to enable our ascension through. That they want to be sure that we're on the right timeline, so they've travelled back in time, which is currently not allowed for in that sort of time dilation understanding. You can't actually travel in negative time. It's just that your positive time is reduced. Or sorry, lengthened, isn't it, if you're going to Planet of the Apes sort of example?
Yes, well, the popular science writing on time travel does acknowledge that, and it said that it would be theoretically possible to travel to the future in that way, but most articles I've seen rule out travel to the past, so that's an interesting prospect.
Yes, and the one movie that does cover that is kind of like this Terminator, where there are beings that come from the future into this time in order to save the guy that they know will become the savior of the world in the future. That's sort of the idea I have for these extraterrestrials who come back in time to correct things now that need to be done in order to enable their future.
Yeah, the Terminator, indeed that whole movie franchise is a perfect example for people to get their heads around what it is you're speaking about. But of course, the point that you wanted to get across was that these extraterrestrials may not actually be alien beings, that you're considering this possibility that it is us from the future.
Yeah, that's right. And there are actually a few well, when they're alien, I mean, they could be human hybrids. And the one person I was thinking of that I did mention was Bashar, who's channeled by Darrell Anker. And he has said, you know how channeling works? There's a human being now who can connect to another being by a channeling process, and the other being talks through the human being that's here now. And the story with Darrell Anker is he brings through someone called Bashar, who is from 350 years in our future, who's explaining things to us now that we need to know in order for that human hybrid future to exist.
Yes, because we don't.
It does your head in some of this stuff, doesn't it?
Well, yes, it does. Anything that messes with timelines. I mean, you have to look at all the humorous and awkward moments in the films like Back to the Future when they get into all sorts of situations because of contradictions thrown up by time travel.
Yes.
So channeling is just like one of it's in that suite of psychic phenomena, isn't it? Like remote viewing and telepathy. It's part of that same idea, and it is backed up by cutting edge science in the sense that quantum science, in the sense of everything being interconnected. So, and it's what I was touching upon earlier when I said that I didn't think time and space were fundamental. I think that time and space become irrelevant at the quantum level, and I think if phenomena like channeling are working as part of a quantum system, then again, time and space don't matter. It's why remote viewing, people can see the past, the future, other places, other planets, other locations, because it's all immediately available. So hence, time doesn't matter either. So what's the particular significance of what Bashar is saying? Is that what you've based this idea on, that the ETs from the future or hybrid humans wanting to keep events on the right track in the present?
Well, he would just be an example of that. It's a sort of Corey Good, David Wilcox. For this discussion tonight, I actually re-listened to David Wilcox' 4.5-hour sort of monologue on the 16th of September, and maybe we put a link down below to it, where for 4.5 hours he explains an awful lot of things, but he spends quite a bit of time explaining time travel, because his concern is that the more and more censorship coming in, he might lose his channel as David Icke has gone down. He was worrying that he might lose his. So he spent 4.5 hours sort of doing a major download of all his information, particularly from someone called Bruce, who he used to have called Daniel, who was an insider to the Montauk Project and Project Looking Glass and all the time travel sort of technology that has been reverse engineered from crashed alien craft. I don't really know too much about the David Wilcox story, but he's got quite a few insiders, and one of them was talking about the Orion box that they recovered from a being called EB, which is extraterrestrial sort of body, I think, or being. And perhaps that was to do with Roswell. I don't know. It was one of the crashed aircraft, and one of the aliens were inside, or extraterrestrials, or whoever they were, survived. And one object he was holding, or he or she, I don't know what it was, was this Orion box, which also be called, when they analysed it, it appeared to be like a pineal gland. It seemed to operate the same way. And he spent a bit of time explaining how our pineal gland works, which is that when they've looked inside our pineal gland, this is a human pineal gland, it's got rods and cones in it, or cells that look very like rods and cones. And there's an optic nerve that comes from the pineal gland into the optical area. So, and the crystals inside the pineal gland, the DMT crystals, when you hit them, they give off light. So what he's sort of trying to analyze is that these ability to use these Orion box is actually just amplifying a natural ability we have that we can probably access at some stage when we get our pineal glands working to travel through time or view through time. And because I think the Orion box was more to do with being able to project your consciousness into another time and perceive that world very clearly. Could be the future, it could be the past.
Well, that's essentially remote viewing in a nutshell there. So,
yeah, it's sort of like an amplification of that. And the idea is that you use this in order to travel not only in time but also through space. So all you have to do is, I'm just saying, it's a skill, it's a highly focused skill that these extraterrestrial beings have, that they can focus on a place and a time, and through the power of these sort of amplification technologies, they can move the vehicle into that place just instantaneously. So you don't actually have to travel through space. You just move there by envisioning it through this box.
Yeah, it's interesting you're mentioning DMT there. It's interesting that dimethyltryptamine is what DMT stands for. It's a psychoactive substance, not unlike LSD, similar types of effects if ingested. There's been quite interesting research around it, formal and informal medical trials. And one of the things that seems to happen is that it acts as an accelerator, as an amplifier of these sorts of skills that we're talking about, psychic abilities, abilities to perceive beyond the five senses. If people are interested in finding out a bit more about that, you could do worse than look at the work of Dr. Rick Strassman in the US, and also a gentleman called Christopher Bache, Bache. He's recently published a book documenting his decades of experimentation, self-experimentation, I should say, with high-dose LSD. And Strassman as well, working with high-dose DMT in hospital in clinically controlled trials. But all of that work lending credence to some of what you're talking about, in terms of, the existence of other beings, other entities, other layers of reality. And, it basically it lends, it's an interesting background upon which to consider your scenario.
Yes. And the underlying idea I have behind all this is that we're living in a virtual reality, and consciousness is primary. And I'm sure you understand this as well, Greg, because I know you've interviewed Tom Campbell, who's my hero in this subject, and maybe it could be a topic of another interview. But the idea is that if we're in a virtual reality, that's why time-space is part of that virtuality. But if you're not in the virtuality, there is no time-space. So the way it works is it's rather like a DVD, all sort of recorded. And as you move from frame to frame, a person can walk across the stage, but he's not actually walking. It's just that there's a frame with him over on the left-hand side, then there's a little bit further on, then there's a little bit further on. And as the frames sort of whiz past you, the eye perceives them as a sort of continuous flow across of movement. But in reality, there's nobody moving. It's just frames whizzing past you.
Yeah, one of the books that really set the stage for the emergence of this subject in the 21st century was written at the end of the 20th. I don't know if you've read David Talbot's Holographic Universe.
That's the one, yep.
Yeah, it was so ahead of its time. But that, again, it's a good one for people who are new to the concept here.
Yes. So what you've got is these frames whizzing past, a world frame. So every single world frame is there recorded in this DVD. But the point about the quantum aspect is that anything in the future from the moment you're experiencing it is probabilistic, but the most probable thing will happen. So according to laws of physics, you can work out what the probability is in quantum terms, and so things will generally work in accordance with the laws of physics, but of course occasionally someone can bend the rules and something completely improbable can be sort of intended to brought into an experience. This is sort of like miracles that happen or spontaneous healing. So it sort of makes sense to me that there is a virtual reality there, and it's the best way of understanding that certainly the past is recorded in what may be called the Akashic record, and you can go back there and perceive bits of the past that have occurred. But the question I have in my mind is, can you actually change the past? And Tom Campbell thinks you can't. It's permanently written, you can't change it. But I have a sense that perhaps you can go back and change things.
Well, if linear time as we think of it, is not so much an illusion, but it isn't fundamental, then that ties in with the idea that past, present, and future are all instantaneously available, even as you say, if the future events are just probabilistic. So that would make the past absolutely accessible. But as for changing it, that's a very good question. But of course, we started out, the whole proposition was that you felt that this was happening by necessity in order to, tweak our timeline, as it were.
Yes, that's right. So I think you can change the past. In fact, I think David Wilcock gives an example that he got from this Bruce person he knew, where someone, for some reason or other, was so mad at his father that he wanted to go back and kill him, which he did. He travelled back in time and killed his father. It's a pretty horrendous thing to think about. And so you've got the grandfather paradox, that how can he live if his father's no longer? And what happened was he went back in time, killed his father, and within a few hours he walked across the street and the car ran him over and he was killed.
I've heard that story actually, and yeah, basically those who hold up the grandfather paradox as objections to the possibility of time travel to the past, I've read several articles which basically explain that, yeah, but the timelines will sort themselves out. So, if you, disturb one part of this system, change it, alter something, then the rest of the system that to a greater or lesser extent is impacted by it will basically settle, It'll find a new level, and basically things will iron themselves out. The guy's accidental death being a classic example. So events will basically just reshape themselves in order so that the future, as it were, isn't affected in that sense. So yeah, it all has a way of taking care of itself, basically.
That's right. Some sort of self-correcting process involved, so that you can't get many paradoxes. Although there's another person I listen to, is a guy called Andrew Barters, the Galactic Historian, and he says there are some paradoxes which haven't been resolved, and we're actually in the process of resolving them through the next few years, or 10 years, whatever it is, the ascension will resolve these sort of historic paradoxes that have never been, which have sort of arisen. And I wonder, you never actually explain what these paradoxes are, but I wonder whether one of them is whether there was one Jesus or two Jesuses, which is a very big subject to cover. I don't think obviously we can cover that. But that's the Seth teachings, where there are two Jesuses, not just one.
What's the significance of that? What's the...
Well, I've just brought it up as that it's one of those kind of like time paradoxes, perhaps. The other one people refer to is the Mandela effect.
Yes.
Where, you perhaps have heard of this one, where in the 1980s, I think, we all were told that Nelson Mandela had died in prison. And people can remember that. And then, of course, we got, when it was a few years ago, wasn't it? He got released from prison and went on to be the president of South Africa for a few years before his passing. So that's one which is a bit of a mystery.
Oh, it's there's at least one whole book devoted to the Mandela effect. It's very, very curious, and yet the people who were convinced that Nelson Mandela had died in prison, these are people across the world unconnected with each other who all believe the same thing, and they're not insane. That they believed that's what the situation was, that's what reality was, until it turned out not to be. I actually had an experience of it myself recently, and I remember saying, oh my God, this is the Mandela effect, and it was around Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, the sort of elder statesman, geopolitical player, globalist, made some proclamations, public statements concerning the coronavirus crisis, and he appeared on television. I saw a clip of him speaking, and I thought, but he died. Kissinger died a few years ago. I was absolutely convinced. And again, it wasn't me not paying attention properly or, losing my own mind or failing to remember things correctly. I was absolutely convinced he was dead. And I was really surprised. I thought, come on, he looks dead. So I was very, very strange experience to have him pop up in the media and me be convinced that he was 6 feet under.
Oh, right. Was that fairly recent then?
Yes, again.
Like within the corona, he actually mentioned the word coronavirus because that's only something we've just got recently.
Okay, well, maybe people listening to this are already on YouTube looking for this, but I'm going to have to go back and double check that. But, it was about basically, the steps that will need to be taken in the wake of this pandemic, things that will need to change, et cetera, et cetera.
All right.
But equally, there were things that he was talking about that he's been talking about half his life, if you know what I mean. So, but that is a subject for another day, isn't it, really?
Yeah, that's another big subject. I thought I just was covered a couple of other items whilst we're on about David Wilcox. Well, I'm sort of condensing 4.5 hours into a short period of time, but he mentioned something called a quantum correlated device. And that the problem with time travel they discovered was that if you it's Dewey Larson, if people want to look it up, is the science behind this, where you've got space-time, which is there's 3 dimensions of space, 1 of time, but there's a reverse world, which is 3 dimensions of time and 1 of space. And in there, the 3 dimensions of time, of course, are past, present, and future. And the 1 of space means that you can travel in time, but from the same bit of space. And the problem with that is that if you go back in time, say you're living in a house, and I go back in time, I can't be sure this house is still here 100 years ago. In fact, it won't be here. I will be somewhere else. And you don't want to go back in time and go into a place that isn't suitable to go back to. So you need to send these quantum correlated devices back in time. And apparently they have an audio video feed through time. It's quite extraordinary, but they're porcelain balls that are rotating in such a way in this magnetic field, such that they go out of phase with this virtual reality, and they can go back and send information to you now about what's there, say 100 years ago, and you can check, whether it's a suitable place to go back to.
Well, that's one issue around practical time travel, which is not usually addressed in fiction, which is like, traveling back in time and finding yourself at the bottom of a lake or inside solid rock, however, which is entirely possible. That's usually glossed over. People time travel from, their laboratory, like as in, H.G. Wells' Time Machine, and they conveniently end up somewhere, on dry land. Somewhere that's with oxygen to breathe and everything, no matter how far back in time or forward into the future they travel.
And it's things like that suggest to me that someone's actually done this, because why would they be so concerned about the complications? It's when you get into detail and, names and people and places and checkable facts that you begin to realize these people are, they're either completely hallucinating and they're sort of mad in a way, or they're telling the truth. There isn't really an option between the two. And in my view, these people have actually managed to achieve time travel. And the next big subject is that there's a channel called Apex TV, if people want to look it up, where there are interviews with people who claim to be time travelers. And they're very interesting to listen to because they come from the future and they tell you what it's going to be like in the future. And the one big thing that I picked up from all this was that they say in the future the currency that we're going to use is Bitcoin.
Oh, well, that'll be music to some people's ears, no doubt.
Yes, so I'm a bit of a Bitcoin fan.
One of the objections to popular concepts of time travel was always, where are the visitors from the future here, showing, demonstrating magical technology, or talking about the, complete regression, devolution of the human race, whatever it happens to be. And I suppose you'd be looking at, for these people who claim to have done it, you'd be looking for, is there any evidence of them, whoever they are? Because if they have apparently no history and have seemingly come from nowhere, and we can verify that, we can just find nothing on them, that would lend, well, certainly be an interesting piece of evidence if someone's there saying they've travelled from the future and there's no record of them whatsoever.
Yeah, well, the problem with them is that often they cover their face because they are part of a program in the future, and the people in the future don't want them to interact with the current and change things. They're just here as really observers. And these people who've stayed on here when they basically disobeyed their instructions and would be taken out by the people in the future. So they don't want to be known who they are. But it could be a cover story. You don't know. I mean, I listened to some of them and they're really very interesting, but they're just kind of like another area that I'm just sort of intrigued at. But I haven't yet really decided one way or the other whether it's valid or not. But what they do say is that time travel will become available to the public in 2028. But the problem will be that time travel, in order to create the magnetic field that's so powerful that you can travel through time, it takes a huge amount of energy, almost, a city's worth of energy, to power them up. So in order to access the technology, you need to be very wealthy, basically, to access this technology, because it'll be hugely expensive because you need a huge amount of energy at the current cost of energy. But, maybe in the future, energy becomes cheap. I don't know.
Well, again, that's another interesting subject, isn't it? Like energy sources, those which are not spoken of. There's a lot of speculation about potential energy sources that would make fossil fuel redundant, basically. Even nuclear, but we're still seemingly a long way, or maybe not a long way, from finding out about that. But sort of things like cold fission and nuclear fusion and those other sort of alternatives that are held up as silver bullets for our energy problems don't seem to be bearing much fruit at the moment, for sure. So perhaps as we move to a close for today, it might be worth if I could get some thoughts maybe about timeline, where we are in terms of this potential intervention in our current reality, tweaking the timeline, as I mentioned earlier. Just things to look for, what you think the timeline is, significant events, just anything really, just to give people a bit more to consider.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about it maybe later on, because I've written a book about this, and in there what I call the Ascension event, and I have it down there. It's really Corey Goods sort of come up with this date of 2030, which is 10 years away. So it doesn't give us very long, but he calls the Great Solar Flash, which would be the thing that activates this ascension, comes through as what he calls sneezes. It's kind of like you get waves of it happening before, but there's a huge wave or plasmic light will come through, which he believes is a great solar flash in 2030. But other people have got dates in 2025, I've heard. I know someone's got 2023, so I don't think it's far off. But, it's a whole other subject, so that'll be very interesting to chat about, what possible timelines. But the trouble with predicting dates is you can't predict dates because it's down to what's called event time. So this event has to happen before the next event happens. And so you can't say that's going to happen in 2023 because it depends on whether, a precursor event has happened. You see what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So it would be, as you say, good to expand that talk and really think about, things to watch for, basically, if indeed we can, because there's also the issue of interpreting developments and events. Do we know what we're looking at when something happens? Something seemingly very significant can turn out to be of no significance and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, the one certain thing I'm pretty sure is pretty significant is Trump being re-elected which is only a few weeks away. And so that'll be my first major event that needs to happen in order for the timeline to pan out as expected.
It doesn't matter what you think of Donald Trump as an individual or as a president, but the all-out assault on him, his character, his record, his life, everything to do with him, it's been staggering to watch. It's quite amazing how, the guns from all sides that have been turned on him. It's incredible.
Yeah, he's an extraordinary story, really, and I think he's got very thick skin to handle the amount of rubbish that's thrown at him by the media. Even in the British press, it's 100% negative stories. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, again, you can loathe Donald Trump and everything he stands for, but there's, the lack of objectivity in a lot of the reporting has been quite incredible. But I saw the same thing around Scottish independence vote here in the UK and around Brexit, the vote there. Again, it doesn't matter which side of those fences you're on, but the media, one-sidedness and lack of objectivity was startling to behold. But again, another subject maybe for another day. So perhaps before we sign off, you want to add your sort of any end notes, tell people about website, etc.
Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. Please like and subscribe this video. And there is a website that's associated with this channel, and that's the Freethinkers group. And we'll put a link down below to the Freethinkers group so people can log on there for more information.